In the last video, I told you that you most likely have a margin issue, not a revenue problem. Today, I'm going to prove it, okay, using your own numbers. This video is going to do one job, and that's to calculate your actual profit margin in about 5 minutes. Not an estimate, not in a vague sense, but your actual number. So pull up your P&L from your accounting platform. Honestly, if you don't have one, it's going to take you more than 5 minutes if you're going from your bank account, but we're going to do this together, okay? In the show notes and in the description, I have for you the 50% margin diagnostic that is only $27, and it'll show you exactly where your business lies in margin and what you need to do immediately to fix it. Okay. Before we hop into everything, because I'm going to share my screen, if you're listening to this on the audio version, head over to YouTube so that you can see just a way that I'm doing it, the demonstration on how I am doing the 50% margin diagnostic. So the reasons why you don't know your margin is because your books might be behind, your numbers feel complicated, and you look at just your revenue and not your margin, aka your profit, or no one has ever showed you what to look for. So here's the thing with profit margin. It's the one of the most important numbers in your business, and it requires 3 inputs for you to calculate. That's it, just 3. So I'm going to walk you through the 50% margin dashboard, aka the KeyPath diagnostic. And we're going to look at your average revenue, your average expenses, and then it's going to create your profit. And then it'll create your profit percentage. So that'll tell you what your benchmark is. If your expenses are over 50% of your revenue, that might be the reason why you are not able to pay yourself in your business. And let's say if you're bringing in about $20,000 a month and your expenses are about $14,000 a month, your margin is only 30%, right? So that means you're not able to pay yourself from that, your ideal salary from that, because 70% of your revenue is already used up for your expenses. So the benchmark for your expenses is 50% before your salary, right? And that's the gap between where you are and where you need to be. And we will figure out what your margin gap is together and how we can fix it. And this is why clarity matters so much, because you can't manage what you do not measure. And stewardship, remember, we talked about that last time. Stewardship requires visibility. Otherwise, you're making decisions in the dark. Imagine just like you're doing business and like you're in the dark, and then you get surprised about why you're getting paid inconsistently. This is going to show you exactly why, okay? So you can go through this with me. You can grab your 50% margin diagnostic. We can do it together and we will go from there. Welcome to the 50% margin diagnostic. And this snazzy tool is going to tell you exactly what is going on in your business. It's going to diagnose your margin percentage and what needs to be improved. So the first thing that you'll do is pull in your revenue. I've already pulled this in. This is just like a sample. It's going to be months 1 through 6, right? And then we're just, revenue fluctuates in business. That's how it is. This here says retainer. Retainer is typically more consistent, but just for this example, to make it simple, I just did one revenue category. So we have the average at 19,398. And then team members here. So for this example, right, we have an ops manager. Delivery assistant is basically some, like if you have a service-based business, they actually help you deliver on your service. So they are a direct cost. And a marketing assistant, these names can be changed. So whenever you purchase it, you'll be able to like change the name of the person or the title for you and your business. And then we have like other team member. I didn't want to change the template, so I'm just putting, these numbers here. And effectively, right? Because of this average team member cost total is 6,443. That's 33% of revenue. So to me, that's telling me, okay, you're spending a little bit too much on team, in my opinion. Let's go to the rest of the expenses. So we have advertising, bank, all those different things, coaching, consulting, cool, all these different things. And right now we see that total expenses on average for the past 6 months is 5,728. Cool. That's 29% of your expenses. Not too bad. But then we see the total expenses with team plus your operating expenses are an average of $12,172. That's effectively 62% of your revenue. So this is your profit before your owner's pay. So even some months, we have 2 months where it's negative. So that doesn't mean that your bank account is negative, because your cash flow versus your profit are two different things. I actually have an episode about it. So, very shorthand version of it. Your cash flow is like your beginning cash balance plus cash in. In this case, it'll be your revenue, minus cash going out, which is your expenses, your owner's pay, and then any debt that you have, any taxes that you pay, right? And then we have your ending cash balance. That's the difference. But in this case, your profit before pay on average in this business is 7,226, and that is 37% of revenue. So for this example, we see that owner's distribution or owner's pay is it just like up and down based off of the response of the business. So on average, that's about 68:33. But what if, right? In this example, the ideal owner's pay is 10,000. You're not able to pay yourself 10,000 on this average for the past 6 months in this business example. So a couple of things need to change. So this is not going to change much besides your revenue. However, we can see the structure. So let's finish. So here it's going to calculate just a really rough estimate of your taxes, and that's 30% of your profit. Usually, when it comes to putting taxes over to a tax savings account, it's either on the top of revenue at 15% of your revenue or 30% of your profit. There's a lot of nuance depending on your family size, the state that you live in, and other factors of your tax return. So it's not going to take into account everything. This is a really, really rough estimate. So based off of these averages, an average of about 2,100, that's about 11% of revenue, because your expenses are higher. So that means you need to account for, so that means your taxes will be a little bit lower because your profit is a little bit less than what it would be if you were at 50% profit before pay. Now let's get into cash available, like out after your debt. So say this has some space over here for debt. I will not go on a soapbox for debt just yet. But if you have credit cards that are close to being maxed out, what I would do is put everything on your operating account. Just take it off your credit card, put it on your operating account, and just pay off these. Because if you're not paying off your credit card in full every month, you're just hustling backwards again by adding on additional interest expense to your expenses. And then you're effectively paying off your credit cards more than you would if you would have just, let's just kind of pay this out, versus using it and then paying the minimum, and then now you're just like in a cycle of like you just like paying it, using it, interest. We don't want that. But for this example, cash left after debt, we aren't where we need to be, because on average now it's negative 1,700, and this business does not have any debt. So what we need to do is figure out what's the correction. But before we have a correction, the current margin percentage on average is 37%. So based off of these numbers here, revenue's strong, but they're structurally weak, right? What does this mean? Revenue exists, but expenses may be quietly eroding profit in this example. So the most common category is the most fixable. So pricing, and then auditing non-essential expenses. So your software, especially figuring out where are you advertising, what are the fruits of where you're advertising, and then defining your CEO pay as a fixed item, right? So this is this example. If you were above at 45 to 50%, you can kind of have that here. Once you get this 50% diagnostic, it'll actually kind of give you like a diagnosis of like, okay, a full diagnosis of like, what does this mean for you? What to expect and how to improve it. And then if it's 60% or more, there might be a couple things like that might be amazing. That might actually be ideal for this company. But if you are still paying yourself like inconsistently and you're over 60% margin, that means although you have high margin strength, are you paying yourself consistently? And what would that change once you hire, you know? So now we're going to go ahead and fix it. So this actually fixes it, quote unquote, fixes it for right now. So the corrected here means that if you change nothing about your expenses, that means you have to now make about $25,000 in your business, right? So let's see what that means. So if we have no changes here to team members, that means if you make $25,000, this probably is going to increase, especially with your delivery assistant. It's 11% of your revenue. So even if you increased it, you're still going to have the same issue. I have a course called the Major Margins Method where I help entrepreneurs effectively recreate their structure in their business so that they can pay themselves more, make more money, and then also ensure that they have the proper profit margin. So we will help you understand, okay, what would need to happen with your team? Are you consolidating your team members? But in this example, nothing changes about team, but we know in fact that this will change. This will still be 11%. So if it's corrected, it's just showing the revenue, right? So in reality, this line item will change with more revenue. It might not be ops manager, it might not be the marketing assistant or the other team member, but if you deliver, you're probably going to increase an expense there. So that's why we say it's not necessarily revenue, it's a structural issue. So it went from 29 to 24% and then now it's 50%. Okay, so what does this mean? So now you have 12,369 and then you have your ideal pay at 10,000 and then profit still is at 2765. Uh-oh. Even the key path, right? Key path is a benchmark. It might be okay to do a little bit lower than 50% or it might be even better to have higher than 50% profit margin before pay to satisfy your holistic needs in your business. So for this example, this is where it's like, okay, 50% is cool, it's cute, but if I do want to pay myself $10,000, that means I need my expenses to be a little bit less than 50%. Okay, so now that we have that, let's get back to the teaching. So we already talked about the different margin placements, and if you're under 30%, let's take a breather. For me, that was exhilarating because I love numbers and percentages. But if it was like exhausting for you, I'm here with you. I'm here for you. Raise your hand if your profit percentage was at the 30 to 44% mark. Okay. Because that is almost always where businesses are when I do this key path diagnostic with a 50% profit diagnostic. And I want you to hear me clearly. This is not a character flaw at all. This is just a simple structural gap. I say simple, but it's not like easy to fix necessarily, but it is simple because now we have to figure out what are some ways that we can introduce efficiencies with our expenses while also increasing our revenue without the same level of increase of our expenses, which is just going to keep getting us into a perpetual place of lower profit margin. And, this is a number that you should not just set it and forget it or do it once and just leave it alone. This is something that you should be able to look at. This diagnostic, you should look at it at least twice a year. Honestly, ideally every quarter. So then that way you can figure out, okay, am I moving that momentum? Am I really moving in a direction that is going to satisfy what I need to pay myself? Because if I can't pay myself what I need for my business, what am I doing all of this for? And this goes back to stewardship again. Proverbs 10 is where Solomon starts to talk about like his standards, okay? Like the Proverbs of Solomon. And he talks a lot about the contrast between the diligent and the lazy. He talks about like integrity versus the wicked. And in verse 5 in Proverbs 10, he shares, he who gathers crops in the summer is a prudent son, but he who sleeps during harvest is a disgraceful son. So we have these beautiful plans. We get all these tools and kits and all those things. We get excited. We calculate the numbers. We say, okay, this is my goal. But right before breakthrough, right before harvest, you stop in your tracks. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, okay, to perform this exercise, even if it's not this key path diagnostic, perform an exercise similar to this at least twice a year, if not even more so quarterly, right? So then that way you can continue to make these improvements in your business. And I'm talking to myself too, because this is easy for me to do for other clients, but is it something that I can do for myself as I'm doing it for clients too? So I'm talking to myself just like I'm talking with you, as if we're just face to face. We sit in the living room drinking our tea, okay? So then continuing on verse 17 of Proverbs 10, Solomon shares, whoever heeds discipline shows the way to life, but whoever ignores correction leads others astray. We don't want to do that, okay? So now that you know your number, in the next video, I'm going to show you the 3 mistakes that keep business owners stuck at that 30 to 44% range, sometimes for years, even though revenue is growing consistently. And knowing the mistakes is exactly how you will stop repeating them. So before we leave, right, get this 50% diagnostic. Go to lovelyfinancials.com/50. It'll also be in the show notes, and you'll be able to do this full version for yourself. And yeah, let me know. Reply back to me when you receive it. Let me know where you are. Once you get the diagnostic, it'll kind of give you just a view of how to improve. I'll see you on the next video. Talk soon. Bye.